Well, picture this. It's the 19th century in India. We are way before the era of satellite imaging or carbon dating or even just basic digital photography. Before archaeology was really considered a modern science, there were just ruined temples, buried cities, broken sculptures, and silent mounds of dust scattered all across the subcontinent. Someone had to literally step into that dust and try to hear the voice of ancient India before it was silenced completely. So, welcome to this explainer. Today we're focusing on a forgotten savior of history, a guy who dedicated his entire life to pulling South India's ancient soul back from the brink of total erasure.
Which brings us to a pretty fundamental question, right? Who really saved South India's ancient past? You know, when people talk about Indian archaeology, the conversation almost always points to just a few really famous names who uncovered the grand, iconic sites up north. But while everyone else was focused elsewhere, or honestly just ignoring the crumbling ruins altogether, someone was painstakingly cataloging the southern half of the subcontinent. Who actually preserved these ancient structures when the rest of the world was basically looking the other way?
History often suffers from a massive blind spot. We all know the globally famous figures, like Sir Alexander Cunningham, the man who founded the Archaeological Survey of India back in 1861. But while he gets all the spotlight, an unsung hero was working quietly in the shadows, Alexander Rea. Now, Rea was a British archaeologist who joined the ASI and eventually rose to become the superintendent for the Southern Circle. His jurisdiction covered massive territories. We're talking modern-day Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, and parts of Kerala. Yet despite his absolutely monumental contributions to saving South Indian history, he remains largely forgotten today. Crazy, right?
Section 1. A Race Against Time.
Okay, to really understand Rea's immense value, we have to recognize the dire, desperate state of South India's monuments in the late 19th century. When Rea arrived on the scene, this wasn't some casual, laid-back academic study. No, it was a desperate race against time. These ancient structures were entirely exposed to severe weather damage. Worse yet, beautiful, centuries-old monuments were actively being dismantled by locals just to be used as cheap construction materials. Priceless ancient sculptures were being stolen, sold off, or even melted down for their base materials. Grand stupas were just vanishing, completely buried under expanding villages and farmland. Without modern tools, heavy machinery, or really any massive funding to speak of, this incredible history was literally disappearing into dust.
In a colonial era where, frankly, a lot of officials viewed antiquities merely as exotic treasures or, pretty decorative stones to just hoard away, Rea held a radically different belief. For him, archaeological objects were crucial historical documents. He realized that saving a broken statue or a random piece of a wall wasn't just about saving art, it was about saving the only remaining records of entire lost civilizations. So, how do you save history without digital cameras, drones, or even paved roads? Well, you do it with grueling, methodical precision. Rea's approach basically involved 4 strict steps. First, creating highly detailed site plans. Second, taking exact architectural measurements. Third, meticulously recording every single sculpture by hand. And finally, copying down the historical inscriptions. He spent his life working in intense heat, often in incredibly remote locations, just ensuring that if a site were to be completely destroyed tomorrow, its exact dimensions and details would survive on paper forever.
Section 2. Rescuing the Amaravati Stupa.
Now, Rea's painstaking methodology perfectly positioned him for his absolute crown jewel, the Amaravati Stupa in Andhra Pradesh. The tragic trajectory of this site is just staggering. Originating around the 2nd century BCE, it was once one of ancient India's grandest Buddhist monuments, seeing massive expansions during the Satavahana period. But after centuries of neglect, it fell into complete ruin. By the time the 19th century rolled around, much of this magnificent site was scattered, severely damaged, or just completely buried underground. So what did Rea actually pull from the dirt? Well, he excavated these massive stone railings and intricately sculptured limestone panels. He uncovered incredibly detailed narrative scenes depicting the Buddha's life right alongside these stunning lotus medallions. By conducting these systematic excavations, he physically rescued these artifacts from being further damaged or just reused in local village construction. He quite literally pulled the grand Amaravati Stupa back into the light. And the historical impact of these specific discoveries? Absolutely immense.
See, before Rea's excavations, our knowledge about early Buddhist activity in South India was incredibly incomplete. These discoveries prove definitively that Buddhism absolutely flourished in the Deccan and South India. It revealed highly advanced artistic traditions, leading modern historians to establish and identify the famous Amaravati school of art, which is now considered one of the most important schools of ancient Indian sculpture.
Section 3. Temples, Tombs, and Megaliths. But Rea wasn't just a one-trick pony, right? Beyond his Buddhist excavations, he extensively documented Hindu temples as well. He recorded architectural measurements, structural descriptions, and artistic observations, creating these exact hand-drawn layouts of the sites. And this is incredibly vital because, in the century following his work, many of these very same Hindu structures suffered severe weather damage or were drastically altered by modern renovations. Actually, today, Rea's meticulous drawings often serve as literally the only surviving historical evidence of what these temples originally looked like.
And he went even further back in time, too. He explored megalithic remains like ancient burial sites, stone circles, cairns, and Iron Age graves. So he didn't just save known history, he effectively expanded the entire timeline of South Indian civilization, proving that a deep, complex prehistoric culture existed there long before any of the recorded kingdoms ever emerged. Section 4. The Colonial Archaeological Context. Now, to truly understand Rea's work, we have to address the complex reality of British-era archaeology. There are perfectly valid modern debates today regarding colonial control over heritage, ownership disputes, and the historical movement of antiquities from India to foreign museums. It's a complicated topic. However, we also have to look impartially at the historical reality on the ground during Rea's time. These monuments were facing imminent, total destruction. Antiquities were actively being melted down or broken apart for bricks. By moving these artifacts to safer environments in museums, Rea physically preserved monuments that, frankly, would have otherwise been completely lost to time and human expansion.
Section 5. An enduring historical legacy.
When Alexander Rea eventually retired after decades of grueling service in the intense heat of South India, he left behind a legacy that still shapes how we see history today. Every single time modern historians study the Amaravati sculptures, or ancient South Indian temple architecture, or megalithic cultures, they indirectly rely on Rea. They use his published archaeological reports. They study the museum collections of the antiquities he physically saved. His original measurements remain the absolute baseline documentation for modern Amaravati studies today. He fundamentally helped transform archaeology from mere treasure hunting into a systematic, serious historical study. Which brings us to a final thought I want to leave you with. History doesn't just survive on its own. Temples collapse, inscriptions fade away, and entire cultures can vanish beneath the dust. Alexander Rea dedicated his life to rescuing those fragile fragments of civilizational memory. But it begs a really profound question. If history only survives when someone steps up to rescue it, what parts of our past are vanishing in silence today, right now, just waiting for someone to notice? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.